Hello. So in this video, I'm going to talk about why I'm an Eastern Orthodox Christian and why I'm not a Roman Catholic. Okay, so let me just go ahead and say that as far as salvation, I'm not saying that you have to be Eastern Orthodox, an Eastern Orthodox Christian to be saved. I certainly wouldn't say that because salvation is between each person and God. Okay, it's kind of a mystery of God, how and why people are saved. Only God knows the heart of each person, and it's not for any person to judge. Only God can judge, and only God can ultimately decide whether or not someone is saved. So I don't believe in getting into the argument of, okay, this certain sect of Christianity is saved, and this other sect is not saved. I think that's complete nonsense. I think salvation is only something that God can give on his own terms for his own reasons. Okay. And so I think of the person on Jesus's, I believe it was Jesus's right hand side on the cross, who, there was the guy who was kind of mocking Jesus, and, but then there was the other person who was crucified next to Jesus, and he was contrite and humble, and he was kind of asking for forgiveness. That person wasn't even baptized or anything. Okay. So yeah, the idea that it's like, okay, if you don't do this certain step, you're not going to get saved or whatever. Again, God can waive those requirements. Okay. And so the sinner who was next to Jesus on the cross, who was saved, and Jesus said, on this day, you'll be with me in paradise. That person obviously didn't have the time to be baptized, and, but Jesus has the authority to, waive any requirements, that he sees fit. Okay. So, while I believe in the sacraments, for example, baptism, because that's something Jesus did himself. And so, we should try to, perform the same sacraments that Jesus Christ did. For example, baptism, Jesus was baptized in the river. And so, we should try to do that. He even said, on the night before the crucifixion, he said, eat the bread and drink the wine in remembrance of me. This is my body and my blood. Okay, so those were all the sacraments, and the sacraments were things that were established by Jesus Christ himself. They were practices like baptism, like the Eucharist, that were given by Jesus Christ as a way to, almost like a meditative practice, almost a way to tune in, okay? A way to constantly keep the reminder of Jesus, of God, to kind of keep that connection, okay? But when we see the sinner on the cross who was saved without doing the Eucharist, without doing the baptism, obviously, God has the power to save whomever he decides to save, okay? So that, again, I'm not saying that you have to be an Eastern Orthodox Christian to be saved, okay? However, I will say, why is this video titled, why I'm Eastern Orthodox and not Roman Catholic? Well, if you know the history, they were the same church for the first 1,000 years. And they both have what's called apostolic succession, which means if you look at the lineage, in the Western church, the Pope gets his lineage, ties his lineage to St. Peter, who was crucified and martyred in Rome, okay? But you have to ask yourself the question, if you're a Protestant or whatever, and you go, well, I know the Pope draws his line to St. Peter. Well, but you have to keep in mind that Jesus had 12 disciples, and he didn't just have one disciple, he had 12. And so if you look at the chapters in the Bible, like in the New Testament, you look at the chapter of Corinthians and Thessalonians, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Thessaloniki and the Corinth, the cities, those are Greek cities, okay, Greek cities. Well, you have to ask yourself the question, those cities that there are chapters in the Bible named after, Paul's epistle to this city or to that city. Well, those cities have been Christian for 2,000 years, and they have their lineage to St. Paul, okay? And those are all Eastern Orthodox religions, okay? Churches that were established by St. Paul, they were established by St. Andrew, so there's these different cities in the ancient world, like Antioch and Jerusalem and Constantinople, and the cities in Greece that it talks about in the Bible. All of those churches were founded by some apostle or some disciple of Jesus Christ. Okay, and the first 1,000 years, that was all one big church. Okay, well, what happened? What happened was in the Western Church, in the Roman Catholic Church, there started to be sort of deviations from the original doctrine. Okay, for example, the Pope added phrases, to some of the early creeds that were decided upon hundreds of years before by the ecumenical councils, where all the bishops, all the people that had a direct line to an apostle, they would come together in these ecumenical councils in the first, centuries of the church, and the doctrine was established. Well, later on, the Pope started doing random stuff like the celibacy, the mandatory celibacy of priests. Well, that's something that has never been required in the Eastern Church because it was never a requirement of Jesus Christ. And that's why Eastern Orthodox priests can get married. Most of them are married. And if they're celibate, it's 100% voluntary. It's not something the church is telling them that they need to do. If some people want to become a monk and they want to be a celibate monk, that's their choice. But it's certainly not mandatory. It's not a requirement. And you can be a full-fledged priest in the Orthodox faith and not, be celibate. Well, why did the Pope make that rule? Well, in the 10th century, there was the progenitor. So the first son would inherit all the land. So if the priest had children, they would inherit the land, and the church land would be divided up. Okay. So if you look at the Bible, Jesus is constantly making the example of things of the heavenly world versus things of this world. Okay. For example, render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Okay. So obviously render unto God what belongs to God. So he's constantly making the separation between the worldly affairs like money and taxation and all these kind of things that God doesn't really care about, and the spiritual things of heaven. Okay. So, the idea that a priest would have to be celibate in order to keep all the land in the church is a more money thing. It's a more humanly affair. It's something of this world. It's not something of God. It's a perversion of the original doctrine. So again, that's a clear deviation from the original teaching. And you can clearly see, when celibacy is a mandatory thing, it actually creates a lot of psychological problems. It creates a lot of unnatural behaviors. And it's kind of an abomination. It's something the original church never did. It's something that Jesus Christ never told anyone to do. Even a lot of the apostles and disciples of Jesus Christ were actually married. So it's an abomination, and it's a deviation from the original doctrine. The other thing is, the Crusades and all these other things. The Pope lives in this massive palace. He's got things of this world, like big armies and money, and just obsessed with things of this world. So all of those things were a deviation from the original teachings of Jesus Christ, who Jesus himself didn't have an army, didn't live in a palace. He lived a very humble lifestyle. And again, the church that he established and the church that his apostles and disciples established, those churches still exist in places like Constantinople and Antioch and Alexandria and Jerusalem. Okay. And so all of those churches, the Orthodox churches, have all of the original sacraments in their full measure. Okay. In a lot of the Protestant churches, they don't even do the Eucharist. Or if they do it, they might do it once a year, or only certain members can take part in it. Well, in the Bible, Jesus gave the wine and the bread, and he's like, pretty much this is for everybody to do, to remember me. Not just something maybe a couple of people do once a year. But again, it's the full measure of the church of Jesus Christ, which has never been defeated, and even the gates of hell have never prevailed against the church. And so, like I said in the beginning, I'm not saying that you have to be Eastern Orthodox to be saved, but I think the Eastern Orthodox is the most authentic, original, unchanging church that was established by Jesus Christ and his apostles directly. Again, look at the chapters in the New Testament, the Romans, the Corinthians, the Thessalonians. These are all church communities that are still in existence to this very day, that were established by Jesus Christ and his disciples. And so for me personally, I like to be in a church that is as authentic and as close to the original teaching as possible, and has never deviated or swayed from the original teachings. Okay, I'll leave you with that. I look forward to your comments. Please like this video and subscribe, and I look forward to hearing your comments.